Before we begin, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear will fundamentally challenge everything you believe about human history, power, and reality itself. This isn't another conspiracy theory video. This is a deep investigation into patterns that repeat across millennia, patterns that connect ancient myths to modern power structures in ways that defy conventional explanation. Throughout human history, one symbol has appeared again and again, across every continent, in every culture, long before these civilizations could have contacted each other. The serpent. Not as a simple animal, but as an intelligent, powerful being that shaped human destiny. From the Garden of Eden to the pyramids of Egypt, from Hindu temples to Aztec ruins, the same story repeats with haunting consistency. Beings with scales, with cold intelligence, with the power to control humanity from the shadows. Now, you might think this is just mythology, just ancient storytelling. But what if I told you that in our modern era, thousands of people, including military personnel, pilots, and scientists, have reported encounters with these same beings? What if the myths weren't metaphors at all, but memories, distorted accounts of something that actually happened, something that may still be happening today? Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to explore the most disturbing possibility in human history. Not that we are alone in the universe, but that we never have been. That the rulers we see, the systems that control us, the very trajectory of human civilization may have been guided by an intelligence that is not human at all. An intelligence that has learned to hide in plain sight, wearing human faces while maintaining its true nature beneath the surface. This investigation will take us from the oldest temples on Earth to modern military bases, from ancient bloodlines to contemporary power structures, from mythology to documented encounters that have never been satisfactorily explained. We'll examine why the serpent appears universally in human culture, why certain bloodlines obsess over maintaining their genetic purity, and why some of the most credible witnesses in modern history have described encounters with beings that match ancient descriptions with terrifying precision. The question we must ask is not whether this sounds impossible. The question is whether we can afford to dismiss the evidence simply because it challenges our understanding of reality. Because if even a fraction of what we're about to explore is true, then humanity's place in the cosmos is far more complicated and far more dangerous than we ever imagined. To understand where we are, we must begin at the beginning. Long before modern conspiracy theories, long before the internet allowed information to spread across the globe in seconds, humanity was telling stories about serpent beings. These weren't simple tales of talking snakes. These were complex narratives about intelligent reptilian entities that possessed knowledge, power, and authority over human affairs. In ancient Mesopotamia, one of the world's first civilizations, serpent figures dominated religious iconography. Ningishzida, whose name translates to Lord of the Good Tree, was depicted either as a serpent with a human head or as a man with serpents rising from his shoulders. His symbol, two intertwined snakes, survives today as the caduceus used in medicine. To the people of Mesopotamia, this wasn't a decorative choice. Ningishzida represented fundamental forces of life, death, and authority. Some scholars have connected him to the Anunnaki, the powerful sky gods described in Sumerian cuneiform texts as beings who descended from the heavens to guide and shape humanity. Now here's where it becomes interesting. In the 20th century, controversial writers like Zecharia Sitchin argued that these weren't gods at all, but extraterrestrial beings who engaged in genetic engineering, creating or modifying humanity to serve their purposes. Whether you accept Sitchin's specific interpretations or not, the consistency of these myths demands explanation. Why would the earliest civilizations describe their gods as serpent-like beings who came from the sky and possessed advanced knowledge? Across the world in India, we find similar patterns in texts thousands of years old.
The Mahabharata and the Puranas describe the Nagas, beings who are half human and half serpent. These aren't simple monsters in cautionary tales. The Nagas are sophisticated entities capable of shape-shifting, taking human form when they choose, while retaining their true reptilian nature. According to these ancient texts, they live in an underground realm called Patala, filled with treasures and secret knowledge. Sometimes they act as benefactors, bringing fertility and rain. Other times they are vengeful, wielding poison and destruction with terrifying efficiency. What makes the Naga mythology particularly relevant to our investigation is the detail about their underground dwelling places and their ability to appear human. These same themes appear in modern conspiracy theories about reptilian beings living in underground bases and infiltrating human society through shape-shifting or advanced technology. The consistency across cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, suggests either a universal human archetype or something more concrete, a memory of actual encounters preserved through mythology. Traveling to Mesoamerica, we find perhaps the most elaborate serpent worship in human history. The Aztecs revered Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, as a god of creation, knowledge, and the winds. The Maya worshipped Kukulkan, whose great pyramid at Chichen Itza was designed so that on the equinox, a shadow in the shape of a serpent appears to slither down its steps. Think about the astronomical and architectural knowledge required to create such an effect. These weren't primitive peoples engaging in simple animal worship. They were advanced civilizations attributing the gifts of law, astronomy, and agriculture to serpent deities.
When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas, some chroniclers claimed that the Aztecs mistook Hernán Cortés for Quetzalcoatl returning from the east. Whether this is historically accurate or colonial propaganda, it reveals how central the serpent god was to Mesoamerican cosmology. In modern reinterpretation, some researchers suggest these feathered serpent gods might have been ancient astronauts, beings from elsewhere who ruled and taught humanity before European contact disrupted indigenous civilizations. Egypt and Greece continue the pattern. In Egypt, the cobra goddess Wadjet reared above the crown of every pharaoh, her hood flared in eternal vigilance. Every ruler bore her image on their forehead, a reminder that kingship itself was protected and legitimized by the serpent. This wasn't decorative symbolism. The uraeus, as it was called, represented the pharaoh's divine right to rule, a right granted by serpent deities. In Greece, Apollo slew the giant python at Delphi and claimed its sacred oracle, one of the most important religious sites in the ancient world. Medusa, with her crown of living snakes, could petrify men with a glance. In these traditions, the serpent was never just an animal. It was always a figure of power, transformation, and terror. The serpent represented something that stood between humanity and the divine, something that mediated between worlds. Now, anthropologists and psychologists offer explanations for this universal serpent symbolism. They point out that humans evolved with an instinctive fear of snakes, which carried deadly venom and posed a constant threat to our ancestors. This fear, hardwired into our brains through millions of years of evolution, naturally became embedded in our myths and symbols. Psychologist Carl Jung went further, describing the serpent as an archetype in the collective unconscious, a primal image representing hidden wisdom, renewal through the shedding of skin, and death through its venomous strike. These explanations make sense from a psychological and evolutionary perspective, but they don't fully account for the specificity and consistency of the myths. Yes, humans fear snakes, but why do so many cultures describe intelligent serpent beings who ruled over humanity, who possessed advanced knowledge, who lived underground or came from the sky? Why do these beings consistently appear as teachers, lawgivers, and controllers of human destiny rather than simple predators to be feared and avoided? Modern conspiracy culture has seized on these ancient patterns with renewed intensity. The serpent in Eden is reinterpreted as an alien tempter offering forbidden knowledge. The feathered serpent gods of Mesoamerica become ancient astronauts. The underground Nagas become subterranean reptilian bases. The cobra on the pharaoh's crown becomes evidence of Illuminati bloodlines. To believers in reptilian conspiracy theories, these aren't random mythological elements, they're fragments of a suppressed truth, humanity's collective memory of beings that once walked openly among us and may still be here, hidden behind human faces or dwelling in the depths beneath our feet. The transition from ancient myth to modern conspiracy began in earnest during the late 19th and 20th centuries. Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical movement, described in her massive work The Secret Doctrine a cosmology in which humanity was shaped by successive root races, some with serpent-like qualities associated with wisdom and hidden knowledge. While Blavatsky framed these as spiritual rather than physical beings, her writings planted seeds that later theorists would interpret more literally. As pulp fiction magazines flourished in the early 20th century, serpent beings moved from occult texts into popular entertainment. Robert H. Howard, creator of Conan the Barbarian, published The Shadow Kingdom in 1929, introducing readers to serpent men who could disguise themselves as humans and infiltrate kingdoms from within. This core trope, the idea of shape-shifting serpent rulers walking among us unseen but pulling the strings of power, would become central to modern reptilian conspiracies. The contactee era of the 1950s and 60s, when people began reporting encounters with beings from flying saucers, initially focused on benevolent human-like space brothers warning about nuclear war. But scattered among these accounts were darker reports of reptilian entities. As the abduction phenomenon grew through the 70s and 80s, cataloged by researchers like John Keel and Jacques Vallée, reptilian descriptions became more common. Some abductees insisted their captors weren't the small gray humanoids that dominated UFO lore, but tall, muscular, scaled beings that radiated dominance and cruelty. These accounts rarely reached mainstream media, but they circulated in UFO journals and conferences, forming an underground body of testimony. What made these reports disturbing was their consistency. Witnesses separated by continents and decades, many with no knowledge of each other's accounts, described nearly identical beings. Tall, between 6 and 9 feet. Scaled or leathery skin in shades of green, brown, gray, or copper. Elongated heads with ridged brows and angular jaws. Most striking, the eyes. Vertical slit pupils that glowed with inner light, colors of yellow, red, or green. The gaze was described as hypnotic, paralyzing, capable of invading thoughts and stripping away free will. The hands and feet bore little resemblance to human anatomy. Witnesses spoke of long, clawed digits, sometimes 3 or 4 fingers, tipped with talon-like nails, capable of tearing flesh or metal. The feet resembled those of reptiles, splayed and clawed. And there was the smell, a recurring detail that appears across testimonies with disturbing frequency. A sulfuric, acidic odor, like ammonia or rotting eggs, that clung to skin and clothes long after the encounter. Abduction researchers documented cases where reptilian beings appeared as commanders or overseers, while smaller gray humanoids acted as technicians. This hierarchical structure suggested to investigators that multiple non-human species might be involved in whatever was happening, with reptilians at the top of the command structure. Dr. Carla Turner, who documented numerous abduction cases before her death in 1996, noted that encounters involving reptilians were among the most traumatic reported, far more disturbing than the typically clinical interactions with greys. Many abductees described not just physical procedures, but psychological warfare. They spoke of overwhelming telepathic intrusion, of having their minds invaded and their free will overwritten. Some reported being deliberately terrorized, forced to experience intense fear that seemed to feed or energize their captors. This led to the concept of loosh, a term popularized by out-of-body researcher Robert Monroe, describing emotional energy, particularly fear and suffering, that certain entities harvest from humans. Whether metaphorical or literal, this idea of reptilians feeding on human fear became a central element of the conspiracy narrative. The reptilian conspiracy might have remained confined to UFO circles and occult speculation, if not for one man who gave it a global platform. David Icke, a former BBC sports broadcaster, experienced what he described as spiritual awakenings in the late 1980s that convinced him he was chosen to reveal hidden truths. After a disastrous 1991 television interview where he announced himself as the son of the Godhead and predicted global catastrophes, Icke was mocked mercilessly by British media. His mainstream career was over. But rather than retreating, Icke doubled down. By the mid-90s, his theories had crystallized around a shocking claim. Humanity is secretly controlled by a race of shape-shifting reptilian beings from the Draco star system. In his 1999 book, The Biggest Secret, Icke outlined a comprehensive narrative. The world's political leaders, aristocratic families, and financial elites weren't fully human. They were hybrids, part human and part reptilian, created through ancient interbreeding programs to serve as visible rulers, while their reptilian masters remained hidden. Icke's most explosive claims centered on bloodlines. He argued that so-called blue blood aristocracies and dynasties weren't merely privileged by history, but genetically distinct, carrying reptilian DNA. Royal families, banking dynasties like the Rothschilds, political leaders from both American parties, all were accused of being either full-blood reptilians or hybrids, using shape-shifting abilities or holographic technology to maintain human appearance.
Critics immediately accused Icke of repackaging anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in alien clothing. The rhetoric about secret bloodlines controlling the world had echoed centuries of persecution. Icke vehemently denied the charge, insisting he meant it literally, not Jews, but actual reptilian beings. His insistence on a non-human enemy drew a clear line between his theory and purely human conspiracies, though the controversy never fully subsided. Despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy, Icke's lectures drew massive audiences. His books sold internationally in multiple languages. The internet amplified his reach exponentially. In forums and early websites, the idea of reptilian infiltrators spread like wildfire. Videos purporting to show politicians' eyes momentarily flashing with reptilian pupils or faces briefly distorting went viral. Clips of Queen Elizabeth or American presidents supposedly glitching into reptilian form were shared widely, reinforcing the sense that Icke's theories weren't fantasy, but hidden reality slipping into view. The late 90s and early 2000s proved fertile ground for such ideas. Globalization, political scandals, the internet boom, all fueled deep distrust of authority. Icke's lectures, often lasting 10 hours, wove together ancient myths, modern abductions, financial corruption, and secret societies into a single story of reptilian domination. For his followers, it was a grand unifying theory explaining wars, economic collapses, media manipulation, and political theater as orchestrated events designed to keep humanity controlled and generating the fear energy that reptilians fed upon. The cultural impact was undeniable. By the early 2000s, shape-shifting reptilian had become a meme. Shows like The X-Files and the 80s miniseries V had already used reptilian themes, but after Icke, audiences began seeing them as coded references to suppressed truth rather than fiction. A 2013 poll revealed that 4% of Americans, millions of people, believed shape-shifting reptilian people control our world by taking on human form. That percentage, though seemingly small, represents more adherents than some established religious denominations.
Icke had successfully planted the reptilian conspiracy into cultural consciousness. The serpent that haunted ancient myths had been repackaged for the modern age, tied to globalization, media manipulation, and elite power. For followers, Icke offered not just entertainment, but a terrifying explanation for the chaos of contemporary life. Every war, every financial crash, every scandal could be traced to reptilian manipulation. The theory provided dark clarity in a confusing world. But the reptilian narrative isn't built solely on ancient myths and one man's lectures. It's reinforced by thousands of eyewitness accounts from people who claim direct encounters with these beings. These testimonies form perhaps the most disturbing evidence in the entire phenomenon. Unlike myths open to interpretation or theories that can be dismissed as speculation, these are personal stories from individuals who insist they've seen, touched, or been taken by reptilian entities. Dr. Carla Turner's research provides some of the most detailed documentation. In her books Taken and Masquerade of Angels, she collected testimonies from multiple abductees who described reptilian beings as dominant presences during their experiences. While gray humanoids appeared clinical and detached, reptilians were described as intimidating, aggressive, sometimes sexually predatory. Witnesses insisted these beings were physical, not illusions, leaving both emotional scars and sometimes physical marks. The consistency of sensory details makes these accounts harder to dismiss. Many report the same sulfuric, ammonia-like odor. Some describe claw marks or scratches on their skin. Others recall overwhelming telepathic communication, where their own thoughts seemed replaced by alien commands. The repetition of these specific elements across different witnesses and decades suggests either a powerful shared archetype embedded in human psychology or actual encounters with something real.
Among the most infamous testimonies are those surrounding the Dulce base legend in New Mexico. According to whistleblowers like Phil Schneider, a geological engineer, Dulce wasn't just a military installation, but a joint human-alien complex where reptilians oversaw genetic experiments. Schneider claimed he witnessed a firefight between U.S. soldiers and reptilian beings deep underground in 1979, though his story remains fiercely debated, and his 1996 death was ruled suicide under suspicious circumstances. His claims became foundational to reptilian lore, linking these beings not just to abductions, but to military secrecy and collaboration. Other abductees describe encounters in remote areas or during missing time episodes. Some accounts involve being taken to underground facilities where they witnessed disturbing scenes, vats of biological material, cages with captive humans, hybrid embryos in tanks, all overseen by tall reptilian beings who radiated cold authority. These descriptions, whether accurate memories or constructed narratives, paint a picture of systematic exploitation, of humanity being used as a resource by non-human intelligence. The Mutual UFO Network has collected thousands of abduction cases over decades. While most focus on gray humanoids, a persistent minority describes reptilian beings. Researchers cataloging these reports note how emotionally intense reptilian encounters are compared to others. Witnesses speak of overwhelming dread, the sensation of being in the presence of a predator. Some describe being forced to stand or kneel while beings examined them. Others insist they saw humans working alongside reptilians, fueling suspicions of collaboration between hidden elites and non-human masters. Skeptics naturally offer alternative explanations. Sleep paralysis can produce vivid hallucinations of figures in the room, feelings of pressure on the chest, and the sensation of being watched. In this state, the mind is partly conscious while the body remains paralyzed, creating terrifying experiences that feel entirely real. Cultural contamination is another factor. Science fiction has populated our collective imagination with reptilian antagonists for decades, from Star Trek's Gorn to the aliens in V. Witnesses might unconsciously draw on this imagery when interpreting ambiguous experiences.
False memory implantation under hypnosis represents another possibility. Studies show that hypnotic regression, commonly used by abduction researchers, can create detailed but inaccurate memories.
The hypnotist's questions and the subject's expectations can shape the recovered memories in ways neither party recognizes. From this perspective, the consistency of reptilian descriptions might result from cultural expectations rather than actual encounters. Yet something remains unresolved in these skeptical explanations. If reptilian encounters are simply sleep paralysis hallucinations or false memories, why do the sensory details remain so consistent? The slit pupils, the sulfuric odor, the towering presence, the clawed hands, the telepathic intrusion. Why do abductees from different continents, different decades, different cultural backgrounds, many with no knowledge of UFO literature, describe nearly identical beings? Cultural contamination spreads through media, but it doesn't typically produce such precise consistency in sensory details that many witnesses couldn't have encountered in popular culture. Dr. Carla Turner, before her untimely death, warned that reptilian encounters represented direct evidence of manipulation and control, not misunderstood spiritual experiences. She argued the beings used deception, creating illusions to mask their true appearance or intentions, but the underlying reality remained consistent: domination, intimidation, and exploitation. Her warnings remain among the most cited in abduction research, lending gravity to claims that might otherwise be dismissed. The weight of eyewitness testimony, whether accurate or not, has fundamentally shaped the modern image of reptilians. They aren't abstract concepts, but visceral presences described by ordinary people who believe they were taken against their will. The eyes, the claws, the smell, the psychic dominance, these details appear again and again, forming a mosaic of fear that's remarkably consistent. If these accounts are psychological projections, then humanity has conjured a predator that perfectly embodies our deepest fears: violation, domination, loss of control. But if they're not projections, if there's even a kernel of truth beneath the testimonies, then the implications become far darker. It would mean reptilians aren't symbols, but participants in human experience, actively abducting, experimenting, and manipulating under cover of darkness. The question of underground bases adds another layer to the mystery. If reptilians exist, where do they live? The consistent answer across abduction accounts and conspiracy literature points beneath the Earth itself. Subterranean realms, vast tunnel networks, hidden bases, cavernous cities, these are said to house the reptilian presence. For believers, underground empires represent the hidden geography of control, where human and non-human agendas collide in darkness. Dulce Base remains the most infamous alleged site. Located near Dulce, New Mexico, on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation, this purported massive underground facility supposedly hosts human-alien collaboration on genetic and technological experiments. The legend gained traction in the late 70s and 80s, with claims that abductions in the region linked to activity beneath the Archuleta Mesa. Phil Schneider's public testimony in the 90s, describing his 1979 encounter with reptilian beings during construction work, captivated audiences, despite lacking verifiable evidence. Schneider described a firefight erupting between U.S. military personnel and reptilians during routine drilling, resulting in dozens of deaths and leaving him injured with visible scars. His lectures carried visible emotion and physical evidence he attributed to the incident. When he was found dead in 1996 under circumstances his supporters found suspicious, his testimony gained even more traction. Within conspiracy culture, his death was seen not as suicide, but as silencing by forces unwilling to let his story spread.
The Dulce narrative became foundational, blending with abduction testimonies describing underground laboratories where humans were experimented on, hybrid embryos gestated, and reptilians directed operations with chilling authority. Some accounts described vats of biological matter, cages of captive humans, genetic experiments merging reptilian and human DNA. These details, however fantastic, reinforced the idea that reptilians weren't distant visitors, but embedded in hidden facilities beneath American soil. Dulce isn't alone in reptilian lore.
Richard Shaver in the 1940s published accounts in Amazing Stories magazine describing encounters with Deros, degenerate underground beings manipulating humanity from beneath. Mountains and sacred sites worldwide are tied to similar myths. Mount Shasta in California has long been associated with hidden civilizations. Native traditions speak of spirits dwelling within. Later esoteric traditions described it as a gateway to Lemuria, a lost continent whose survivors retreated underground. Modern conspiracy theorists fold reptilians into this narrative, claiming bases beneath Mount Shasta house non-human rulers working with secret military programs. In Tibet, legends of Shambhala and Agartha describe subterranean kingdoms ruled by advanced beings. Western explorers brought these tales back, fueling speculation about underground masters guiding human affairs. South American cave systems in Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil inspire similar legends. The Teos caves, explored by figures like Erich von Daniken, were rumored to contain metallic libraries left by ancient civilizations, guarded by non-human beings. There's a strange consistency to these stories. Whether in New Mexico, California, Tibet, or South America, the narrative remains the same. Beneath sacred or remote places lies a world unseen, older than human history, inhabited by non-human intelligence. For some, these are myths of hidden wisdom. For others, they're evidence of a literal reptilian network beneath our feet.
Even declassified military projects fuel suspicion. During the Cold War, governments invested heavily in underground infrastructure. Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, built deep into granite, became NORAD's headquarters, capable of surviving nuclear war. The United States constructed hundreds of underground bunkers and facilities, many still classified. The Soviet Union built vast subterranean complexes beneath Moscow, including rumored Metro 2 tunnels for government evacuation. To conspiracy theorists, these secretive projects aren't simply about national security. They're evidence of deeper collaborations, hiding something beyond military command centers. If governments have dug extensively into the earth for survival, why not imagine another intelligence has already claimed the depths? The parallels between ancient myths of subterranean serpent beings and modern accounts of underground bases seem too close to be coincidental. The most disturbing aspect isn't simply that reptilians might live underground, but that humans might be working with them. Testimonies like Schneider's and countless abduction accounts suggest collusion, secret deals where governments traded technology for control, or worse, for access to human subjects. If true, this would mean not only are reptilians real, but human leaders have known all along, quietly submitting to their authority in exchange for power. From a psychological and sociological perspective, the reptilian phenomenon reveals deep truths about human nature and society, whether or not the beings themselves exist. Psychologists point to the triune brain theory, introduced by neuroscientist Paul MacLean in the 1960s, which divided human neurology into 3 evolutionary layers. The reptilian brain, the most ancient structure, governs survival instincts, territorial behavior, aggression, and dominance. Though modern neuroscience has moved beyond some aspects of this model, the metaphor remains powerful. The idea that beneath our rationality lies something cold-blooded, primal, and reptilian helps explain why the archetype resonates so strongly. When abductees describe reptilian beings radiating control and domination, they might be externalizing the oldest part of their own biology, the predator within given a face and form. Carl Jung's theory of archetypes within the collective unconscious offers another perspective. The serpent, Jung argued, is a universal symbol embodying both creation and destruction, wisdom and deception. Serpents appear in dreams, myths, and visions as guardians of hidden knowledge, but also as threats to survival. Jung believed archetypes emerge spontaneously across cultures because they reflect shared human experience.
The serpent slithering unseen, striking without warning, these images are hardwired into us through evolution. The modern reptilian might be this ancient archetype resurfacing in new contexts, fueled by contemporary anxieties about control and power. Sociologists see the reptilian as a perfect metaphor for oppressive systems. Cold-blooded, calculating, ruthless, the reptilian symbolizes corrupt elites and faceless institutions. In times of political turmoil or technological upheaval, people search for explanations that make sense of chaos. A hidden cabal of reptilian rulers offers not only an answer, but a vivid image of inhumanity at the heart of power. Cultural cross-pollination plays its part. Movies and television have long depicted reptilian antagonists. Each appearance in popular culture feeds back into collective imagination, shaping abduction narratives and conspiracy claims. Yet cultural influence alone cannot fully account for consistency of testimonies across decades and continents. The sulfuric smell, the slit eyes, the towering presence, these details appeared even in cases far removed from Western media.
There's also a sociological dimension to fear of infiltration. Humans have always harbored anxieties about outsiders, enemies disguised as friends, hidden rulers pulling strings. From medieval fears of witches to Cold War paranoia about communist spies, societies externalize their fears in stories of hidden enemies. The reptilian conspiracy might be a modern version of this dynamic, the fear that those who lead us are not only untrustworthy, but not even human. In our age of globalization and digital surveillance, the idea that leaders are cold-blooded infiltrators resonates strongly with audiences who already feel powerless. Whether reptilians are literal beings or projections of fear, the image itself has power. It shapes culture, influences belief, and spreads across the world as a living narrative that refuses to die. What makes the reptilian idea truly unsettling is how it challenges our understanding of human history and power. If the myths contain truth, if the abduction accounts reflect real encounters, if the bloodline theories point to actual genetic manipulation, then everything we believe about human civilization requires radical revision. We would have to accept that behind the visible architecture of power, behind presidents and parliaments, behind financial systems and media conglomerates, operates an intelligence that is fundamentally alien to humanity. This intelligence would be patient, operating across centuries or millennia. It would be sophisticated, capable of manipulating human psychology and social structures. It would be ruthless, treating humanity as a resource to be managed and exploited. And most disturbing, it would be successful, having maintained control for so long that most humans never question whether the systems they live within were designed by human hands or shaped by something else entirely. The reptilian conspiracy, whether true or false, forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, control, and the nature of reality itself. It challenges us to consider whether the official narrative of human history, of gradual progress and human agency, might be incomplete or deliberately misleading. It asks whether the patterns we see in ancient myths, in modern encounters, in bloodline obsessions and underground facilities point towards something real that has been systematically hidden from public view.
As we reach the end of this investigation, we're left with more questions than answers, and perhaps that's appropriate. The reptilian phenomenon, whether literal truth or powerful metaphor, resists simple explanations. We've traced the serpent from the Garden of Eden through ancient civilizations to modern conspiracy culture. We've examined eyewitness testimonies that span decades and continents. We've explored the possibility of underground empires and genetic manipulation. We've considered both psychological explanations and the disturbing consistency of evidence that defies easy dismissal. The truth is, we may never have definitive proof one way or another. If reptilians exist and possess the capabilities attributed to them, shape-shifting, telepathic control, advanced technology, they would, by definition, be nearly impossible to expose. If they don't exist, if they're projections of human psychology and culture, then their persistence makes sense precisely because they tap into something fundamental about human fear and our relationship with power. What we can say with certainty is this: throughout human history, the serpent has never been far from our consciousness. It appears in our oldest myths, our religious texts, our encounters with the unknown. It represents something primal, whether that's an evolutionary fear hardwired into our brains, an archetypal symbol emerging from the collective unconscious, or a memory of something that actually happened, preserved through generations of storytelling. The modern reptilian conspiracy has given new life to these ancient patterns, connecting them to contemporary anxieties about globalization, surveillance, and elite power. Whether David Icke and his followers have uncovered a terrible truth or created a compelling myth, they've touched something that resonates deeply with millions of people, searching for explanations in an increasingly complex and confusing world. For those who believe, the evidence is overwhelming. The consistency of ancient myths, the testimonies of abductees, the obsession of aristocratic bloodlines with genetic purity, the existence of vast underground facilities all point toward a hidden reality that mainstream society refuses to acknowledge. For skeptics, the same evidence demonstrates humanity's endless capacity for pattern recognition, even when no pattern exists, and our tendency to project our fears onto external enemies rather than confronting the human sources of oppression and control. But perhaps the most important takeaway from this investigation isn't about reptilians at all. It's about the nature of power and our relationship to it. Whether the masters of our world are cold-blooded aliens or simply cold-blooded humans, the systems of control remain real. The manipulation of populations through fear, the concentration of wealth and influence in the hands of a few, the secrecy surrounding centers of power. These are documented facts, regardless of who or what sits at the top. The reptilian conspiracy forces us to think critically about authority, to question official narratives, to consider possibilities beyond conventional wisdom. Even if literal reptilians don't exist, the investigation reveals how power operates in shadows, how bloodlines and elite networks perpetuate themselves across generations, how ordinary people can be made to serve interests that aren't their own without ever realizing it. As you move forward from this investigation, the question isn't necessarily whether you believe in reptilian overlords. The question is whether you're willing to look critically at power structures, to question what you've been told, to consider that reality might be more complex and stranger than official sources acknowledge. Because whether the serpent is literal or metaphorical, whether it's scales and claws or simply the cold calculation of human elites, the warning remains the same. There are forces in this world, human or otherwise, that view most of humanity as resources to be controlled and exploited. Understanding that fact and refusing to accept it passively may be the most important step we can take toward genuine freedom. The serpent, after all, offered knowledge in the Garden of Eden. Knowledge that came with a price, but knowledge nonetheless. Perhaps the reptilian conspiracy, true or false, offers us the same dangerous gift, the knowledge that we must question everything, trust nothing at face value, and recognize that the world we see may not be the world that truly exists. The investigation continues, the questions remain open, and somewhere, in the depths beneath our feet or the shadows behind power, the serpent watches and waits, as it always has, as it perhaps always will.